The death of a man who sang and played the guitar overshadows the news.
When John Lennon was shot in December 1980, it sent ripples of horror and awe around the world, prematurely ending the life of one of the greatest artists that the world has ever seen. But 3 days before the tragedy, Lennon would speak to Rolling Stone magazine, talking mostly of music and drawing, and one particularly interesting comment he made is that only 2 people that he ever collaborated musically with for more than one night were Yoko Ono and Paul McCartney. But even if Lennon had never come out and explicitly said it, it's still fairly obvious that the relationship between Paul McCartney and John Lennon was complex and unique. From meeting at a fete in 1957, through the heights of Beatlemania, the breakup of the band, and a frosty relationship through most of the 1970s, and a reconciliation before Lennon's death, their relationship was full of highs and lows. A workhorse of a songwriter, Paul McCartney was bound to express his feelings after the death of Lennon through his writing, creating one of Paul McCartney's best and most unusual love songs, Here Today. McCartney said he initially resisted writing about Lennon's death for fear people would think he was cashing in on it. He had already received backlash for his supposed nonchalance at Lennon's murder.
What time did you hear the news? This morning sometime. Very early? Yeah. Don't know, yeah? Drag, isn't it?
But eventually, he would write a song about it. Writing in what he describes as a small room with bare wooden plank floors and bare walls, he took his guitar and began. The song begins with a moment of uncertainty, a C-sharp minor 7 flat 5 chord, arpeggiated on acoustic guitar. This chord feels unstable, unfinished, like the relationship between the 2 men that the song is about. The song opens on a musical question, unanswered and ambiguous.
And if I said I really knew you well, what would your answer be?
The entry of McCartney's vocals sit comfortably in the middle of his register. The bass then descends a semitone to a C natural, and an A diminished chord in first inversion is heard, continuing the question, the tonal ambiguity. As the question finishes, what would your answer be? The bass resolves down a perfect fourth to a G, resting on the root position G major, finally establishing the key as G major. However, almost as soon as this tonal centre is established, we shift away from it, with an E flat major chord being borrowed from the parallel minor of G minor, returning the lost and mourning quality of the opening, something assisted by McCartney's vocal line leaping up a whole octave and switching to his falsetto.
If you were here today,
After this, we get a minor plagal cadence standing us firmly on the tonic key of G major, and McCartney's vocal line falls to a B closer to the middle of his register. In his article, The Time and Work of Paul McCartney, James McGrath notes that Here Today evokes an earlier Paul McCartney hit, Yesterday. There are a number of similarities between the 2 songs, and they can be heard at this point especially. Firstly, the cadence at this point is plagal, something which Howard Goodall notes in one documentary about the Beatles is rather unusual in pop music at the time, and something which Paul McCartney had picked up from church songs in his youth.
Plagal cadences are almost entirely absent from the music that Paul McCartney grew up with. They're nowhere to be found in the songs of Elvis Presley, Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Buddy Holly, Carl Perkins, rock and roll generally, or the dance band music that his dad played, or the Hollywood movie musicals of the 40s that everyone knew, or even music hall. No, plagal cadences come from hymns. The old familiar Amen you used to hear in church is a classic plagal cadence. Amen.
Though it should be noted that the cadence in Here Today is a minor plagal cadence, evoking a sadder sound than Yesterday. Furthermore, the instrumentation is the same, acoustic guitar, strings, and McCartney's voice, and the production was done by George Martin, the first released by McCartney and Martin since Live and Let Die, all the way back in 1973. After a repeat of the verse, the song shifts to the subdominant key of C major, which would normally create a feeling of darkening and closing off, but in this instance, as McCartney's melody rises into a higher register, it feels like it's brightening, like it's opening up.
But as for me, I still remember how it was before.
In 1784, Daniel Schubert wrote that C major is associated with innocence, artlessness, naivety, children's talk. Along with the more childlike sound of McCartney's higher-pitched singing here, this reminds us of a younger time, the time as children when Lennon and McCartney met at that fete in 1957. McCartney's vocal line falls down an E minor arpeggio on Tears No More.
And I am holding back the tears no more.
McCartney said in 1982, the year of the song's release, that he was kind of crying when he wrote it, and that it eventually just fell out, like the falling arpeggio here. McCartney then lays it out plainly, saying, I love you.
I love you. Ooh.
When asked if it was hard to say, he said, of course. Part of me said, wait a minute, are you really going to say that? I finally just said, yeah, I've got to. It's true. A D7 chord here, the dominant for G major, returns us to the tonic key for the next verse. As the next verse commences, McCartney's vocals accelerate, punching semiquavers on What About the Time We Met and a delay effect a minimum later, adding a more digital quality to an otherwise strictly acoustic song.
What about the time we met? Well, I suppose that you could say that we were playing hard to get.
This digital nature reminds the listener that we aren't in the 1965 world of yesterday anymore. We're in a more modern world, a world in which John Lennon isn't. Something else worth noting here is that for one brief bar, 2 beats are cut out to create a bar of 2/4, with McCartney's intuition and guitar playing dictating the time signature rather than any sense of fixed pulse.
Well, I suppose that you could say that we were playing hard to get. Didn't understand a thing, but we could always sing.
This is especially noteworthy because this is a songwriting technique that is heavily used by John Lennon. For example, here in Strawberry Fields Forever, where Lennon slides between 4/4, 2/4 and 6/8 effortlessly.
Nothing to get hung about. Strawberry Fields Forever.
This gives this moment a distinctly Lennon-like feel, touchingly fitting for this tribute to him. The cello expressively alternates between the ninth and the root of the E minor chord, a singing quality like the singing that McCartney is singing of here.
Didn't understand a thing, but we could always sing.
The next line, What About the Night We Cried, is referring to a night in Key West, Florida, touring with the Beatles. A hurricane in Jacksonville had diverted their plane to Florida, and they had a rare moment of respite when the hurricane passed. McCartney says that all 4 of the Beatles ended up drunk, singing, talking, and at one point crying, saying things like, "Let me tell you man, you're fucking great." The song concludes with a reprisal of the verse, the same chord structure as the opening, but with a more elaborate string quartet accompaniment, and the very last moments of the song serve as one final reminder of yesterday, with the plagal ending and the day word rounding off the song. Paul McCartney changes up set lists of his live shows often, but Here Today has been returned to many times, becoming something of a live staple for him.
And if I said I really knew you well, what would your answer be?
The gentle ballad allows for a moment of contemplation in the shows. McCartney says he's often thrown by people crying when he performs the song, likely both crying at seeing a man perform such a tribute to his friend and collaborator, but McCartney himself has also acknowledged the universality of the message of the song, saying it sort of translates to anyone. It could be about someone else, but in my case, it was about John. Paul himself is not immune to swells of emotion during performances of the song, sometimes, in his words, losing it during performances of the song, something which he also feels about performing the George Harrison song Something. Here Today is not a usual Paul McCartney love song. There's no kisses, there's no hand-holding, or even a girl to be seen. It's a man left alone after his long-time collaborator has been snatched from him. The relationship between Lennon and McCartney has been analysed tirelessly, and is undoubtedly so complex only one man alive today will ever be able to fully comprehend it. But what we all have is Here Today, a beautiful song and a touching tribute to the great man, John Lennon.
For you were in my song.